So pleased to meet everybody. As you heard, my name is Miles Drayton. I come from a background of marketing, strategy, and yes, global insights. So really great to be here and talk a little bit about some of the work that I've observed both through some of my history at Johnson & Johnson, but also some of the time that I've spent at Mondelez, which is, if you're not familiar, it's one of the biggest snacking companies in the world. The biggest, actually. And then now, more recently in my time at General Motors. So, we all know the challenges that we face as researchers. We're drowning in data, and we're lacking in meaning. We hear those kinds of, have those kinds of sayings very often. And I think now with the explosion of marketing and performance-driven marketing, we're seeing that even more. So much data, so many zeros and ones, but what do we actually do with that? And I think that's where the role for us as insights folks really needs to come to the fore. This only gets exacerbated when we had our COVID friend come. That was actually, I would say, the renaissance moment for researchers, because who did they turn to actually understand the dynamics of what was going on? They came straight to us. All of a sudden, every company out there formed task teams. We needed to understand week-by-week movements. We wanted to understand, at least in my day, what was happening to snacking as suddenly people stayed at home, what was going to happen in the future, how could we forecast something that was such an anomaly. So we had to rely a lot on some of piecing of different pieces of information together in order to actually tell a story that made sense for our business stakeholders. Throughout all of that, we also have to have a business mind. We constantly get asked, what is the ROI of your insights? Can you point to an element that proves out the dollar value of what you're doing in your research? We hear it all the time about brand health, social listening. What can we point to? And what our classic response is it infuses everything. It guides our strategy. It enables us to take certain actions. But oftentimes, the dollar value associated to that is lost. And that becomes very difficult if you're facing a very left-brained organization that likes to look at numbers and likes to see everything on a profit and loss sheet. So the challenge for us is to make sure that with every insight that we give, there is always a commercial implication to that. And throughout all of that, the challenge for us as well is through that data, through the pandemic, through trying to see numbers and ROI and return on profit and investment, there's a human behind there that we have the responsibility to speak to. And that's where we're seeing a lot of this more recent way of like getting close to consumers, bringing the humanity back. Humaning was another one that was being used at Mondelez. We have to be able to tell our stories in such a way that everybody can relate to them and they make logical sense, because sometimes the business can actually get lost in what they want to do and they don't necessarily see what the consumer side of that reaction is. So we always have to round that out and have that connection point back to the consumer. So the moment really, with all of those things, the explosion of data, the search for meaning, the higher responsibilities that we're now feeling to make sense of what's happening with the changing world so rapidly, the return of ROI and trying to prove ourselves out. Just today, we've seen 0.75 percentage point go up by the central bank. What is the implications? The first things that are going to come to us as researchers is, what is going to happen to the future of demand as we see this? And when you work in General Motors, which is a large purchase, it's going to have a much bigger effect. When you start looking at all of the dynamics of what's happening to the gas price, it's going to have a big effect. Then you look at the chip shortage, which is a temporary thing, but it's also having an effect. So through all of these things, we, as researchers, have to be able to take these pieces and stick them together. And we may not find the solution in sticking them together mathematically. We can rely on it a lot. But a lot of it is that art and science that we have to try and thread that storyline through. And we have to take some bold leaps in terms of that storyline, or else it just won't make sense. If we try to rely on mathematics all the way through, it's not going to resonate as well with our stakeholders. So that has driven, at least during the time that I was at Mondelez, a real search for the right kind of talent to be able to do all of those things. And that's the nature of the conversation I'm having today. Is we call it a unicorn, but actually it can exist. We talk about building a unicorn. It's not necessarily that the unicorn is just there to be found. We have to look at the components of that and build that up as an insights organization. And at Mondelez, we spent a lot of time focusing on what those skills are. And we did a right from the bottom, soup to nuts, on everything that we needed to do to be able to build up our insights organization. So what did we do? We focused and built a competency model. Now that everybody knows roughly what a competency model is, but what we wanted to do is make sure that we captured all of the facets, not just of the technical side, but of the actual artistry side, of the ability to influence. And that's why we came up with this left brain, right brain blend of insights. Because often we rely on the left-hand side to prove our point. But that can only take us so far. That works very well with left brain marketers. But if you do not have the right-hand side, the strategic leadership, the data-driven insight, the ability to hunt and find those insights and stitch them together, none of the left-hand side is going to work. So we went even deeper than this. And I think when you look at these, you look at them and they make obvious sense. So we built out 20 core competencies that we felt were the strongest drivers of what a modern researcher needs to do today. And you can see they fit under each and every one of those sort of major 5 competency pillars. And again, the ones on the left, I call them the ones you can learn. These are the elements of like marketing and media analytics, pricing, growth science, deep analytics, all shopper behavior, all of those things. These are elements that you can learn over time if you have the right mindset and the right level of curiosity to do it. And if you have that natural adaptability to be able to learn it. The ones on the right, these are the ones that often come with time. Lessons learned, exposure to new business environments. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of talent that's best suited for. But these are the ones where it gets a little bit harder for you to clearly map out the learning process to get there. Things like, how do you manage your stakeholders? How do you influence them? How do you know which stakeholders to manage when? How do you know what kind of messages they are going to be open to? There's a lot of that between the lines element when we want to try and drive a particular strategy forward that we have to break through to our stakeholders because they are, in effect, gatekeepers of whether we are going to be successful or not. How do we set an agenda? And this was a big one for us when we were looking at it is, it's not enough for a researcher to be in the room, to just be another member of the team, to be a quiet person in the corner. The researcher has to help define the strategy, not just simply taking, being sort of a short order cook, being a data gatherer, being a, can you go away and find this for me and then we'll come back with an answer. The researcher must be the person who sticks their hand up and says, I disagree with the direction of where we're going because our consumers tell us this. And we need to be aware of that because this is going to trip us up. So that inserting themselves in the conversation is a very, very important part of a researcher's role. Having strong business acumen. We can talk about the human all day, but if we can't bring it back to a commercial action, it's not going to result in an action because marketers are not going to know what to do with it, or sales is not going to know what to do with it, or whoever, your category teams are not going to know what to do with it. So those all are what we would call the strategic leadership elements. Those are the ones where before you even get into a room, you need to be thinking about those elements to try and drive the business. The data-driven insight, here's where it really comes to light. How good are you at storytelling? We talk about storytelling a lot, but the ability to kind of bring people along, and this is really the essence of what us as researchers need to be the best at, bringing that consumer out. Visualizing the data. Can't tell you how many times you have a great point, but it just gets lost in the data. It gets lost in the message. There's too much complexity. Challenge ourselves. What can we take off the page? How many words do you need? How much repetition do you see? What do they need to know now versus what they might ask for that you can back up? So there's a lot of technical things, even down to, as consultants like to use, invisible spaces on the page, right down to those technical things to let the eye rest in your messaging. There's a lot of that kind of part of storytelling that's critical and often missed. Data curation and synthesis, making sure that we're able to understand the numbers, but then only bring the pertinent points through. Finding the pattern in the data is a critical part of that as well. Having a hypothesis-led mindset, this is a very, very interesting one, and one that I heard Deloitte talking about as well, is that researchers must be deliberate in their research. We often like to say, well, no, we need to be agnostic. We need to be able to see what the consumer says, see what comes up in the data, discover the consumer, discover the action, and then take it from there. We took it a different way. We were saying, actually, you need to have a hypothesis in mind when you're going in to do the research that you must be open to disprove or likely to prove. And that hypothesis must be business-oriented. It must link back to that business acumen. Are they doing this because of that? Therefore, I think that's the case. Can I prove it? If I can't, then that's a surprise for me, and that's also a learning, and that filters into our storytelling. We thought that this was the case, but hey, we found a totally different behavior going on. Humanizing the data is part of that storytelling. You know, I'll give you an example of just most recently from the car industry. You know, we talk about having really strong part sales. We want to drive the sales of our part sales up, and if sales on parts are up, that's good. I say not necessarily, because if that's the case, there is somebody sitting in the service department or sitting at home without their car waiting for a service to happen. So if you push that number up, your brand health may suffer because suddenly your elements of quality, reliability, durability, all of those things start to suffer. So what is the right level of a number to go for? The business chases a high number, but actually there may be a full story in terms of humanizing what they're seeing in that number that actually may be affecting other things. So we should be the monitors to be able to understand there is a relationship between all of these things. And then, of course, digital and tech savvy. It's getting deeper and deeper as we go into cookieless world, as we try to understand marketing down to the lowest site and mobile interactions that we have, trying to understand the purchase cycle or the funnel or whatever we choose to call it. All of that relies on data, but don't lose the point above when we talk about humanizing the data. So these were the elements, and I've paid particular attention to the right-hand side because those are the ones that we feel are the most trickiest to learn over time. What did we do with this information? So we took that and we said, okay, we believe that there could be 4 levels of competency on that, from learning to transforming. And we then mapped those 20 competencies into every single role that we had at Mondelez, every single researcher, whether they were sitting in analytics or shopper or consumer insights or data science, every single one of those little cells you see there is a role and a competency for every one of those 20 competencies. Very, very deep. What we then did is we proved out whether or not we ran assessments across the entire Insights organization, over 250 people, ran the self-assessment of their survey to understand themselves. We then did the manager. The manager then also did it on their team. And that enabled a really good developmental conversation to say, here's where you see you are, here's where I see you are. And that gave 2 interesting parts. Blind spots. Somebody says, oh, I'm really great at data storytelling. The manager's like, not so much. Or hidden strengths. You flip that around. Somebody says, I'm not that good at it. And that you actually tell them, no, you're great at this. So you need to be uplifting. You need to be using this part of your skill set more. You need to be focusing on your development in this area based on where you want to go. Because if you want to go anywhere else in the organization, we have a chart for what the competencies are like in that area. So you know the gap that you need to fill. So this was a very powerful developmental conversation with the teams. It went to other places as well. We automated every single one of our job descriptions. So you now have 63 job descriptions. Anybody who's worked and tried to find talent has to start from zero and build out job descriptions. It can take a long time. This is completely mechanized, and we can very clearly see whether somebody's ready for promotion or whether somebody is driving for a different role and whether they've got the chops to get there. So all of this is a really powerful way of managing your overall team. So, and that also gave us a good talent map in terms of succession planning as well. So lots of different outcomes that have come out of that. What was the end goal that we want to drive towards is what I was saying right at the beginning. Insights and analytics driving impact. We use the BCG, Yale, Cambiar framework very often as a kind of idea of what a North Star could look like of a great insights organization. And that is a 4-stage maturity model, ranging from traditional insights provider. That would be your short order chef cooking. I need a data point. Please, can you get me the data point? No interaction, no strategic discussion. The source of competitive advantage, that's the insertion. That's sitting at the right levels of the organization. That's driving the change. That's influencing the strategy. When we started, Mondelez did a self-assessment at number 2. And after 2 years, we were already at number 3. We also got known on some of the Glint reports, and external reports started to come out that actually Mondelez is a serious player in research and with a bunch of inquiring minds. So this became, and we obviously want to continue. There's many great companies ahead of us, but typically those ones on the right, that's the top 5% of all organizations. And the usual suspects are there, as you can see. But we want to try and do this in every org that I go to. We've now done the same thing on General Motors, and we're finding General Motors is roughly where Mondelez was. So we start the process again. We have to put all of those things in. We have to get the right team built up. We have to focus on the training and the competencies and where the gaps are, so that then we can be more impactful again. And so the cycle continues. So closing thoughts, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I didn't talk much about it when I went through it overall, is about sourcing talent. You have a team, and obviously that's your team, and you want to grow them. That's one side. But you also, as you have turnover and so on, there's an opportunity to find new talent. Don't go to the typical places to find the talent. We found some amazing talent who were journalists that just really had an interesting sight on things. Flip side, we had great data people who were super curious about human behavior. So don't rely too much on that left side of the brain that we looked at when you're sourcing talent. Focus on the right side of the brain, because the left side can be learned if you have the right set of curiosity and the right set of data savviness to be able to understand things. If someone catches on really quickly, that's the kind of talent that you really want. You want people from the business, because then they can speak the language. You want people from diverse backgrounds, because they have a different point of view that nobody else is thinking about. So all of those elements are how we should be thinking about sourcing talent differently. Assess the talent considering the business connection. That is you can't quite see it, but it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. What that means is you have a researcher that's so good at immersing themselves in the business that they're not seen as a researcher. They're seen as a partner. But meanwhile, they're a research brain, and they're operating as a research brain embedded in the business. Be structured and methodical. That's, take a very structured approach to how you see your competencies. Grow them in a way that is very mathematical or very, very specific. You could see how much data we went into. We used the data on ourselves to try and drive the right story. And then finally, show how to grow. Too many times leaders talk about these things, but they don't do that themselves. So there is an element of holding the leaders accountable to, if you want to do storytelling, the leader must show how the storytelling should look, must be very forthright. In Apple, that's one of the things that they expect leaders to be technical experts. There was a period in time that they went away from that, and they actually lost some of their trajectory that they were going on. When they brought specialists back, all of a sudden, you're specialists in their craft that know what to do. All of a sudden, leaders want to follow that person. They're not left to kind of come to their own devices. They'll get strong guidance from really strong leaders. So let's not take away the role of actually leadership when we roll this out. So quick flash in the pan, that's kind of how we built it at Mondelez. And obviously starting that journey again now in General Motors as we build towards that higher level. That's it. I wanted to allow time for questions.
All right, that was excellent. I personally, I was over here texting an old coworker. I'm like, I think I'm a little triggered because but it's real. I think the presentation was so well done because as insights gets deeper and different, right? You do
Right.
have to source talent differently. And for me, y'all that don't know me, I come from a marketing background. I've been most of my career is in advertising, and I get to this firm, and it's like, girl, you got two heads on you. It's like, okay, I don't care if you're an economist or a statistician and all those things. And I was quickly left out of a lot of conversations because I wasn't being looked at as a unicorn. So I think it's really great how you go into organizations, and I might have a few leads for you. Any questions for this great guy? I know some of y'all might need his help. So let's think about what's our questions. All right, go ahead, Kelsey.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. One of the things that I was thinking about as you showcase the matrix and how you kind of map the competencies for your staff, what are there any maybe from that you've used before, any trainings or just maybe things that you would use to kind of help skill up on some of those things?
Yeah, very good. I mean, what was interesting is that we had a feeling in our mind that there were certain things that were missing. Just when you look at one of the ones in particular was storytelling. In that researchers love to put too much information on the page, just to say, this is what I have, this is what I know, this is what I've done, so that you can see all the effort that I've put in. So we realized that we had a gap in storytelling power, and that what we had to do is put in training of people that actually could dial things back to say, you need to guide people along the path. So we already had the storytelling. Another one was influencing. We realized often marketers can get falling into the trap of, oh, we told them, but they didn't do it. And then I'm like, but then did you tell them in the right way that made them realize that they have to do it? So there was that element of making sure that you can influence the story, to influence the stakeholder, know exactly where they're coming from and what trigger points they need. So mapping out those stakeholders, especially when somebody's new in role, making sure that they understand all of those elements that was another training that we were already doing, and it kind of slotted in quite neatly with the competency model.
Miles, it's Andrew over here. That was a fantastic presentation. Really great to see. Like, I think everyone in the room got value out of that, whether you're a supplier or you're a manufacturer, what you do. My question is, you clearly have thought deeply about this. So what is like the holy grail? Like you talked about, let's embed insights with teams. Like how far can it go when you think about dreaming into a future where insights is playing that much more of a valuable role in the enterprise?
It's a very, very good point, and I'm gonna point to one person that I've seen take it to the ultimate. What I've seen right now in General Motors, the chief marketing officer of Cadillac is an ex-researcher. So they came from that mind frame of understanding the analytics deeply, was able to simplify their messaging and commercialize their messaging so much that actually they moved from the head of research to the chief marketing officer. Irene Rosenfeld, who was the CMO, the CEO of Mondelez, was a researcher as well, right at the beginning. And you often find that some of the most thoughtful leaders are the ones that have actually been through that, had a stint in market research, because it's helped them think very differently. So if you're able to commercialize your thoughts, I think that's where the sky is the limit, because then you move out of market research and you move into marketing, you move into sales, we saw a lot of movement into strategy as well, like commercial strategy, because market researchers have shown a way to think about the holistic story and then put that into commercial action as well. So lots of routes beyond just inside of I&A or insights and analytics.
For the left side, no, the right side of the brain.
Yes.
You mentioned is the most difficult part. Totally agree on that.
Yep.
Do you have any tips how one to identify kind of people that might fit or kind, as you mentioned, that just grasp it in the air and hit the ground and run? And how to train these people to help them develop that when you have a team that might not be where you want to be?
Yeah, it is the hardest, and a lot of it is learned through experience and self-awareness. Self-awareness is super important because nobody can grow that side of the brain unless they're aware of what their shortcomings are. And sometimes people have blind spots in terms of what they think they can do and what they haven't done. So you may, before you even start talking about what things they can do, you may have to first make them self-aware. So using 360s is a very powerful way of understanding how the business sees them. Immersing them in actual projects, having them do time in different teams to be able to understand the actions from that. There's a lot of these programs, at least at on the, I would call it client side, where you can spend time in different functions, 6 months, 9 months, talent swaps. That was one of the things that we were starting to focus on quite a lot, is different talent swaps, either both within Insights and Analytics from marketing people, and then our team goes into marketing and spends some time to understand how the machine works. But sometimes it comes down to the person and whether they're hungry enough to do that. And there is that element of some people are hungry and curious, and those are the ones that you can see going far. Sometimes people need to be told what the possibilities can be, so they may not just know. And then you need to rouse the energy out of them. But sometimes it's also just a self-awareness thing that you first have to break through that ice.
Well, everybody, big thank you to Miles Drayton. You are amazing.